Hello, welcome to the second edition of Fish Bites, brought to you by Explore the Ocean World Oceanarium at Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. My name is Ellen Goethel, and in this episode we're going to be talking about sea stars. Now, as a child we called these starfish, but in the 1980s when things got very politically correct, the scientists started referring to these animals as sea stars, mainly because they are not a fish. Fish are vertebrates. That means that they have a backbone. Humans are vertebrates. Marine mammals are vertebrates. They all have backbones. But sea stars do not have a backbone. They're part of the invertebrates, and invertebrate in Latin means no backbone. So because it doesn't have a backbone, the scientists decided that we should call it a sea star. So that's what we'll be calling it today. Sea stars are, their scientific name is Asterias. That's their genus. There's two species, Vulgaris, which can also be called Rubens, and Forbesi. And those are the two common sea stars that we have in the North Atlantic and the Gulf of Maine. So sea stars are echinoderms. That means that they are, that's their phylum. They have body parts that are similar, all echinoderms. So they are all radially symmetrical, all echinoderms. That means they're round. They all have spiny skin. That's what echinodermata means. You could feel it on the top when you touch it. When you turn a sea star over, or any echinoderm, their mouth is on the underside or the ventral side of their body, right in the middle. And this is called the oral groove. Down the middle of each of these rays, they have tiny little wiggly things called tube feet. On the end of each tube foot is a suction cup. That's how all echinoderms move. They use their tube feet to move around. It's also how they eat. Now, sea stars eat bivalves, clams, mussels, oysters, scallops. And what they do, right here we have a few mussels. Mussels are a mollusk. They're a two-shelled animal, an animal that opens and closes. And what a sea star does is it takes his body, he wraps himself around the mussel, takes his tube feet and starts to pull. And they pull hour after hour. Finally, after about 3 or 4 hours, the mussel gets so tired of holding his shell tightly closed, he starts to relax and he pops his shell open just a tiny little bit. The minute he pops his shell open, the sea star takes their stomach, they shoot it out of their mouth into the mussel shell and digest the mussel inside of his own shell. Now that's a unique way to eat. Then after about another hour, the mussel shell falls away empty, and the sea star has a problem because his stomach is hanging outside of his mouth, and he can't pull his stomach back into his mouth until he finishes digesting his food. It's pretty strange. Now, sea stars and all echinoderms can do something very strange called regenerate, and that means to grow again. So say a crab came along and ripped off that ray. What would happen? Very slowly, the sea star would begin to grow a new ray. Very, very slowly. But this is the weird part. Do you see this round section right here? Underneath their skin, in the middle of their body, every sea star has a little round thing called a central disc. If there's one cell, one tiny piece of that central disc that gets ripped off with the ray, while the sea star begins to grow a new ray, his old ray very slowly will begin to grow 4 new rays and become an entirely new sea star. Pretty amazing. Now that's only one way that a sea star reproduces. They also lay eggs like most of the other invertebrates. They can also bud, and this is really strange. So a sea star, when it buds, it grows a brand new little tiny baby sea star on its arm, and then it falls off. That's a little different than most other things. The other thing that all echinoderms have is a water vascular system, and that is really unique. On a sea star, let's see if I can find another one. Here we go. On a sea star, every sea star has a little tiny dot off center. It's usually a different color, and it's not an eye. Sea stars don't actually have eyes that see definition. They have eye spots on the end of each arm that determine light or dark, so it can determine whether which direction the sun is coming from. This little dot is called a sieve plate or a madreporite, and it's actually a filter, because sea stars and other echinoderms have no blood, that they circulate seawater inside of their body through radial canals that look a lot like veins and arteries in our bodies. They circulate the seawater through there, and the seawater does the same job that our blood does. It brings oxygen to the cells, and it takes away waste products from the cells. So they use seawater instead of blood, and as a byproduct of pumping all that water through their body all the time, the suction cups on their tube feet work, so it takes no extra energy for them to actually move. Very, very well thought. Now, this sea star right here, this is a common sea star. It's found in the tide pools, but you can see that he has started regenerating two arms. You can see the tube feet on the underside and his sieve plate right there. So he, in some future time, will have two of those arms grow to be the size of all of the other arms. This is a common northern sea star. They live in a little bit deeper water. These sea stars you'll find along in the tide pools. You can see that they're a slightly different color, and if you hold them, you'll feel that the northern sea stars have more structure to their body, and the common sea stars in the tide pools are much lighter and more flexible. So that's it for today about sea stars. We're going to talk in the future about some other types of sea stars. We'll talk about some of the deeper water sea stars. These sea stars all live within the intertidal zone. The intertidal zone along any ocean is the area right along the coast where the water comes in and covers the ground up and the beach and the rocks with seawater at high tide. At low tide, the water recedes, it goes back out to the ocean and leaves pockets of water stuck between the rocks. Those are called tide pools. Animals that live within that area have to be able to withstand great changes in temperature and salinity. So in the summer, those tide pools get very hot. In the winter, they get very cold. If it rains, the saltiness, it becomes much less salty. And if it evaporates from the heat, the tide pool becomes more salty. So these animals that live there have to withstand real fluctuations in temperature and salinity, and that's something that the deeper water animals we'll talk about later cannot do. So you won't see some of the much deeper water sea stars in the tide pools because they couldn't survive. I also talked about the eye spots that the sea stars all have, and they do on the end have something called an eye spot, and it does detect light, and that's important if you're living in the intertidal zone where the sun can beat down on your body. And you'll notice that sea stars and most sea animals are very light on the underside and darker on the top, and that is for two reasons. One is for camouflage. So if you came up from underneath, if you were swimming and you looked up at the sky and you saw the light part of an animal, it would look like a cloud possibly, but it wouldn't stand out to you. If this animal is laying on a rock and you're swimming above it, you look down, it camouflages into the rock. So that helps him hide from predators. But it also protects them from ultraviolet rays from the sun. We get sunburned, so do other animals. And one of the reasons they have those eye spots on the end of each arm or ray is so to protect them, to keep their darkest part of their body towards the sun, and it protects them in the tide pools against ultraviolet sunburn. So if you have any questions about sea stars, their Asterias in particular, please email me at exploretheoceanworld@hotmail.com. And you can also take a look at my website, which is http exploretheoceanworld.com, or my Facebook page, and I will be putting up some informational sheets on my Facebook page so that you can download them and use them if you need to. And my Facebook page is Explore the Ocean World at Explore the Ocean World LLC. My name is Ellen Goethel, and thank you for watching.